Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever time it is. Welcome to today's webinar. If you're watching the recording, greetings from the past. Hopefully the future is everything we've been promised. Today we're going to be discussing the state of play in regenerative agriculture, how sustainability certifications are evolving to tackle climate change. If that title's a little jargony, I apologize. By the end of this hour, we're going to have that all figured out and it'll make perfect sense. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump in. Everyone's in listen only mode, so except for the guests, I can't hear you, so don't talk at the screen. We will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions during the program, please put them in the chat box, and we'll get them answered. If we don't get through all of it, we'll follow up and answer any pressing questions. Bear in mind that I'm both leading and doing the tech side of things, and I'm not so great at multitasking. I can hardly walk and chew gum. So I'm the sort of the bottleneck here. I'm going to try my best, but we'll see where that goes. As I mentioned, the webinar is being recorded, and we will email it to you tomorrow once things get processed. Can everyone see my screen here? The slides are up. Are we? Yeah, excellent. So we have an excellent panel today. I'm gonna. I'm on multiple screens, and again, the tech thing throws me off. We have three amazing guests. When I was putting this panel together, I really was thinking I would invite three people and maybe one would say yes, and we'd have sort of a cozy fireside chat or whatever that means in the digital world, but they all said yes. So you're in for a treat. So just to start off, I want to ask everyone to tell us who you are, who you're representing, and a little bit of like how you got to where you are. So Anne-Marie, you're first here. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. I'm Anne-Marie Horrigan. I'm on the quality standards team at Whole Foods Market. And we've always been big supporters of organic and the organic industry. And part of the work that I do is around agricultural programs and policies. And we have some farmers that have been farming regeneratively for many years. It's something we've been tracking. And then with the excitement around regenerative organic certification and ecological outcome verification, and the soil carbon initiative, we've been tracking regenerative more and more. Last summer, we came out with a regenerative claims policy and some guidance around how we at Whole Foods are thinking and talking about regenerative and how we can support farmers and ranchers.
Excellent. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Elisa, do you want to jump in? Who are you? Why are you here?
Hello, and Kevin, thanks to you and SES Global Services for putting this group together. I think we've all known each other for a long time and love the work we each other do, and we just so appreciate your team for putting this together. So my name is Elisa Gravitz. I run a nonprofit organization called Green America. We have a very large regenerative agriculture program that includes about 150 people from all over the supply chain, from farmers and companies and investors and processors. If that part of the ecosystem touches soil, they're part of the network. And the network said, we really need a standard, a commitment and verification program that helps all of us talk amongst each other, like, you're growing regenerative, great. We're selling it, great. So there's a handshake all across the supply chain. And so we created the Soil Carbon Initiative, and that's what we look forward to talking with everybody about today.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Elizabeth, who are you? Why are you here?
Kevin, thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for being here. And I just want to make a comment, Kevin, that I've worked with you a little bit over the last few years, and you've never been a bottleneck, and you've always helped to move things along and facilitate things in a really great way. So I don't anticipate you doing that today whatsoever. So yeah, my name is Elizabeth Whitlow, and I'm with the Regenerative Organic Alliance. and humbled every day since I took this job 3 years and a few months ago, that I got to start working in a leadership role as the first employee at the time, the only employee for a while at the ROA. And the Regenerative Organic Alliance is responsible for founding this Regenerative Organic Certified program, and I got to oversee its implementation and the pilot program, and then the launching of the actual certification program October 2020. So not the best time in human history to be launching a new program that relies on boots on the ground and sending people out to visit farms. So we've had a few slowdowns, but we're doing really well, and I can't wait to share some of our successes and some of our learnings, and just work with all of you and seeing how we can help. You know, like how I see it, and what I've been doing my whole career is trying to help farmers to be recognized for the amazing growing practices and land stewardship that they commit to, that help make a healthier planet and healthier people, and you know, trying to help forward those types of farming operations, and welcoming everybody else along on that journey. So yeah, we're gonna I think have a really great conversation today. So thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, just a little bit on my end, since I'm here too. I am the Director of ESG Certifications and Strategy at SCS Global Services. We're a global auditing and assurance and standards development consulting company all around sustainability. I run the regenerative and sustainable ag programs within the Food and Ag division at SCS, and that's maybe 10 different certification processes around environmental protections, farm worker protections, and sort of everything in between. My background's in food systems and local food systems in particular. Through most of my 20s, I helped run my family's food hub in St. Louis, and during that time, I was kind of entrepreneurial. I started an organic corn tortilla company. I ran the local chapter of Slow Food, did a lot of food policy work at the local level, and I served on the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, where I did a lot of technical review of projects that were all geared towards the conversation today. So that's where I kind of learned a lot of the technical side of regenerative agriculture. I did an MBA at Oxford, where I really did a lot of classes and research on the intersection of food and ag and climate. So I'm super excited about today's conversation, because this is what I think about all the time. I think I've built up a lot of anticipation for this group, and so sorry for all the attendees. I'm gonna make you sit through me talking for a few minutes to sort of set the stage, as it were. So are we, see my screen here? We got slides?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. All right. So the world is on fire, right? Things are a mess, and this is really an important grounding for the regenerative conversation. There's been a shift in the last year or two where it's not just, you know, environmentalists or activists saying things are going to be bad. We're actually living through climate change, and you see this with, just in the last year, the extreme weather events that we've had to deal with, whether it's fires or floods or droughts, heat domes. I didn't even know heat domes existed until last summer. The things are getting worse, and the heat dome's a great example. In my reading and research, it was the first major weather event that I saw ascribed directly to climate change, and that's an important thing. Historically, the scientists, you know, they never want to say one event is due to climate change. And in this case, they said, you know, this wouldn't have happened to the same extreme if not for climate change. And for those who are, you know, not up on U.S. climate stuff, or U.S. and Canada climate stuff, or weather events, the heat dome was this heat wave that settled over the Pacific Northwest and saw sustained temperatures of 115 or 120 degrees for several days. For those out in the broader world in Celsius, I think that's 45, 50 degrees Celsius. It's just crazy heat in a place that, like in Oregon and Washington and British Columbia, that doesn't see that kind of heat. They, 20% of buildings there have air conditioning. It's a very moderate climate typically, and a lot of people died. And this is a tragic event, and we're seeing more and more of these. We're seeing fires in Colorado out of season, flooding in Europe and in Asia. And what's especially scary, if I haven't already set the scene of this is bad, most advanced climate modeling didn't show us getting these events for another 20 or 30 years. So we sort of jumped the gun, and suddenly we're living the future, right? So that's sort of state of play there. And any solutions, we need to figure out how do we pull greenhouse gases out of the air and sequester them? How do we decarbonize our societies? There's a lot of effort on the tech side. There's this images of a installation in Iceland called the Orca project that sucks carbon out of the air and buries it, sequesters it in rock formations. A lot of venture capital, a lot of private equity behind these technological solutions, and it makes sense because the big billionaires in the world, where do they make their money? When you think of the big names, it's Elon Musk, it's Bill Gates. They see solutions through the tech lens, right? And so there's going to be a lot of funding here. But in everything I've read, while this might be part of a broader solution or set of solutions to address climate change, it's not going to scale effectively or fast enough to really shift the needle. And that brings us to agriculture. This is why we're here. This is the exciting stuff. Ag is part of the problem, but it's also part of the solution. So I want to just point out a few points here that I think relate to our conversation. We waste a lot of food, right? Most of it is at the consumer level, where people buy food, they put it in their fridge, and then they throw it out 2 weeks later. It spoils. But there's also loss in the supply chain. There's loss in the field. And all of that has a huge greenhouse gas implication. If we could reduce waste, to 20%, the carbon footprint of our food would be significantly lower. On top of that, conventional farming practices are eroding our topsoil. It takes several hundred years to grow an inch of topsoil, and every time we till, every time we leave bare soils, we lose it to wind, to water, and it takes a long time for that to come back. Finally, on the bad column, the food system is a big GHG contributor. It's 30% by some estimates. It's one of the largest by sector, and we're all complicit there, right? Because we all eat. We can move away from air travel. We can walk to work. We can do all these things to remove our carbon footprint or our climate footprint in other areas, but we're going to keep eating. And so that's a problem, but that's also an opportunity. So I'm going to talk through these 3 points, and then we'll get to the regenerative conversation. Topsoil can be restored, right? Through conservation practices, there is hope. We can demonstrate that. There's a lot of research on that front. If we do it right, we don't have all the erosion. On top of that, implementing sustainable ag practices, regenerative ag practices, makes farms resilient to these big weather events that I made spooky a minute ago. When you've got drought, healthy soils can withstand it better than the denuded soils of conventional production. When you've got floods, healthy soils respond that have a lot of organic carbon levels and organic matter in general, right? And finally, and this is a response to that picture of fans, photosynthesis is the best technology we have, right? This is, we have the technology to deal with this problem in conjunction with decarbonizing our society and all these other things. But through forestry, through land use, and through agriculture, we can utilize photosynthesis to pull carbon out of the air, capture it in plant matter, capture it in the soil, and cool the planet. So what is regenerative agriculture? I pulled this slide from Whole Foods' website because it's cute and it's really effective in defining it. Regenerative is not regulated. There's no one definition, but when you look at all these different initiatives around it, one of the common threads is soil health. And these 5 soil health principles are really important. Some models have 6, some have 4, but I think this kind of gets to the point. And it's all about increasing biodiversity, keeping the soils covered, and reducing disturbance. The animal integration is an interesting one because it can be a little scary for people in the produce industry. If you're in Salinas and growing lettuce, you don't want cows on your fields because there's food safety implications there. But when you think of the majority of agricultural production, it's more mimicking grassland systems, and historically that this was part of it, right? You look at like the anthem of the West is "Home on the Range," and the first 2 lines are like, "Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam and the deer and the antelope play," right? You got animals on the grasslands in this space, and this can seem scary, right? I'm not gonna make you all sing "Home on the Range." We can do a chorus later, but none of this is groundbreaking, and that's what's, I think, exciting to some degree. Is indigenous peoples have been implementing these practices for generations. The USDA has been pushing it in their sustainable agriculture programs for 30 or 40 years. It's just the conventional agriculture is not here yet. And so there's a lot of room for improvement, but it's attainable and it's doable. Final slide, and then I'm getting out of the way. In the certification space, the basic role of certifications is to provide assurance and trust around practices that bring a message to consumers, to buyers, that foods are produced in a certain way. And there's a broader group of certifications in this space that we probably would call like climate smart ag programs that have positive benefits from a climate perspective. And you look at ones like Be Better is an interesting one, right? It's a pollinator program. It requires 5% of acreage to be converted to permanent pollinator habitats. That's got a positive climate impact, right? There's carbon being pulled down, but the goal there is not quantifying the greenhouse gas impacts. You see programs like Rainforest Alliance or Sustainably Grown or Fair Trade, maybe to a lesser extent, have practices that have positive climate impacts, but it's not so much about measuring outcomes. And I think that's where there's a lot of innovation happening, and that's where with these 3 standards, there's a shift happening. In this, I say 2.5 because the Soil Carbon Initiative is in pilots right now, so it's not quite to market, but within the year, this one's going to be probably unpackaged or getting towards that anyway. The regenerative organic certification has been around for several years, and I do see that in the stores, right? It's here, it's in the market, and the ecological outcome verified is also there. It's gaining traction. It's growing fast. I think I read we've got 1 million acres under verification. So there's scale here, and there's third-party assurance, and I think that's an important element to this. And that's it. Let me stop sharing, and we can get back to the important people. But I just wanted to kind of lay that groundwork so that it can be a starting point for our conversation. So let's jump right in. Elizabeth, let's hear about the ROA and the Regenerative Organic Alliance and the Regenerative Organic Certification. I'm going to avoid acronyms if I can because there's too many of them in the world. But can you tell us the genesis, if you will, or like why was your organization started and who drove its inception?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And first off, I didn't know you were going to show a picture of my home on your opening slide, but I live right in the center. of all those wildfires. As I think you know, or maybe recall, like I'm constantly in evacuation mode those years until I finally sold my home last year in Northern California. And still, I'm a bit of a climate I guess, or nomad at this point. I'm back in Northern California, but it's pretty stressful living here in these places, and it's very real to me. And my second comment that I'm going to make before I answer your question is, it's not me snoring in the background, it's my dog. So just in case anybody thinks it's me, it's Coconut. So thank you for that. I just don't want to wake her up. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about.
We're 2 years into the pandemic. I think we're at a point where animals are allowed. It's not a,
right.
not a
animals and babies crying, dogs snoring. It's all good. Yeah. So the Regenerative Organic Certified, or the ROC, was created because the founders saw this potential for regenerative organic agriculture to address many of our most pressing problems, the ones you just so succinctly outlined, and that's climate crisis especially, but also looking at factory farming and fractured rural economies. And there's, I think, like another really tremendously important issue that is coming more and more these days is the declining nutrient availability in our foods and a subsequent decline in human health, mostly due to diet-related illnesses or diseases. And so, looking at these topics, I think, are really important and kind of feed into it, especially with Rodale's leadership. The founders of the Regenerative Organic Alliance are the Rodale Institute Patagonia, you may know of as a clothing company, but they have a growing food division as well. And then the beloved natural soap maker company, Dr. Bronner's. So these very iconic brands and organizations came together, I think, one dreary winter day in 2017, and they dreamed up their vision for the future of agriculture. These were all organic to industry diehards, as you would know, because Rodale pretty much brought that here to America in the 40s. And Robert Rodale is in fact attributed with this term of regenerative organic in the 80s. So they came together at Rodale and they talked about their vision for the future of agriculture. They were really worried about a couple things happening in organics, that they saw this weakening of the organic rule as far as allowing hydroponics was one really big concern in those times. And then kind of the, the scaling of organic was leading to this very industrialization of the model and more factory farming happening in livestock operations. And so they came up with this concept of the Regenerative Organic Certified Framework. It's based on 3 pillars. It's soil health and land management, animal welfare, and then one often overlooked and forgotten, but terribly important pillar, as you know, Kevin, because you helped us a lot with this, is the social fairness for farmers and farm workers. And so these 3 pillars were applied to any operation. Has to be organic as a baseline. And so it really does, we talked about this earlier in our pre-meeting about how the ROC is really the North Star. It's a really aspirational standard. And for me, what's been really remarkable is how many operations are arriving at the North Star to join us. So I can get more into that later. I don't want to hog the time, but I'll pass it back to you, Kevin.
Yeah, no, that's a great intro. Thank you. Elisa, I guess similarly, like you touched on it a little bit earlier, but what was the impetus for creating the SCI? How did it come together? And yeah, fill us in.
Great. So first of all, I do want to honor all the work that Elizabeth and ROC is doing. They are truly the North Star. And the Soil Carbon Initiative has a focus of that we believe that everyone who touches soil has the key to advancing a better future for the planet and all of its peoples. So the idea is that what the Soil Carbon Initiative is the first independently verified, outcomes-based regenerative agriculture program that is open to any farmer and any food company. So that's the big idea for SCI. About 3 years ago, as I mentioned, our network came together, or our network said, this is the next thing we need to really accelerate the transition to a regenerative, something that we can handshake all across the supply chain to say, yep, we're growing it, yep, we're selling it, yep, we've got it, yep, we're investing in it. And that's the idea for the verification mark for the Soil Carbon Initiative. We're really proud to be partnering with SCS Global Services as the independent verification partner. So thank you for that. The idea for, and as I mentioned, the initiative came out of this broad network of regenerative leaders. The farm requirements for SCI, the Soil Carbon Initiative, was created by a committee that constituted 1/2 farmers and 1/2 soil scientists. So you can see that collaboration and putting farmers at the center has been part of the Soil Carbon Initiative from the beginning. And in fact, half of our staff are also farmers. So you'll see that all throughout. When you come to our website, I think you'll see that design all throughout. We're at soilcarboninitiative.org. And there's basically 5 key elements of our program. There's commitments that both farms and companies make. There's outcomes-based measurement that they do through soil health testing. If we want to literally get into the weeds in a little bit about what those soil health tests are, I mean, there's been some remarkable progress in the soil health measurement for soil carbon and really so many other dimensions of soil health recently, and we're really happy to be including that measurement in our program. Then there's the independent verification. There's farmer funding, and there's farmer technical guidance. So that's kind of the key elements of the program. The key design elements are that it's involves the entire agriculture sector. It measures outcomes. It doesn't dictate practices because every farm is different. And I loved Whole Foods slide that you presented, Kevin, on the pillars of soil health. And one of the ones that people often add is context, because every farmer faces a different context. And that's really important that any program that involves regenerative take into account. The idea is to achieve verified and meaningful results, and it requires it requires ongoing improvement, and it's interoperable with other systems. Any program that a farmer company, any other program that a farmer company is involved in, this is not exclusive. All those other programs can continue. And in fact, we actually hope that one of the things that comes out of this is diversity below the ground, diversity above the ground, diversity of revenue for farmers, and in that diversity of revenue for farmers is them being able to have access to all kinds of different revenue, which would include ecosystem services and carbon revenue. The last thing I want to mention is that in this process of creating these commitments and these measurements and measuring the outcomes, I also want to really emphasize what's really important is that the farmers own all of their data. We are ourselves an independent nonprofit. Our mission is to assist and accelerate the transition to regenerative. So we do not own the data. The farmers give us permission to aggregate and anonymize it so that we can help others with all the things we're learning and the further guidance. But I just want to mention that because I know that's very important to many farmers who are joining us here on the webinar. Lastly, I'd like to invite folks, Kevin mentioned we're in our go-to-market pilots right now. For those who want to be the next farmers and companies that join, the next application date is April 5th. So please come on over to our website, soilcarboninitiative.org, and raise your hand if you're interested in the pilots.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. There's a lot I want to unpack there. So we'll talk about some of this stuff in a little bit. But Anne-Marie, I think Whole Foods is playing such an interesting role here, connecting these concepts to consumers. More than any other major retailer, the Whole Foods Market has been a leader in driving the regenerative conversation at retail. In your role in quality management, like how are you vetting products making a regenerative claim on package?
Yeah, so we really looked at who we are in the value chain, and as a retailer, we really saw our place was to uphold the integrity of that term regenerative, because it's not defined by one standard or regulation or system. Different people, different organizations have different interpretations of what regenerative is, and different levels of articulation, shall we say. So we talked to a lot of different organizations, a lot of different stakeholders, farmers, ranchers, soil scientists, brands that we work with, and we heard time and time again that our job as a retailer, how we could help them, was to prevent greenwashing of the term regenerative. So to avoid greenwashing, my team, the quality standards team at Whole Foods Market, reviews labels for products making a regenerative claim. And I've spent my career trying to get out of having to review labels, but here I am reviewing labels because it's important. It's important to the people that have invested time and money and their heart and soul into regenerative agriculture. It's important to the consumers that when we're talking about regenerative, that be meaningful and authentic. So the goal here with this policy is to help ensure that products making a regenerative claim are actually regenerative. And we base that around those 5 soil health principles. Thank you for showing that slide, because now I don't have to explain it. But just as a reminder, it's diversity and biodiversity, minimization of soil disturbance, living roots, keeping soil covered, and strategic animal integration. Through our label review process, we evaluate any messaging, seal, or logo on pack that uses the term regenerative, or similar terms. You can't get away with it by saying regenerate or regenerating. And based on the prominence, location, and type of claim being made, we either require a regenerative certificate from an approved program or a regenerative assessment. In terms of a regenerative certificate, thank you for the previous slide, Kevin, because that saves me from having to show those logos. But we currently recognize the regenerative organic certification and the ecological outcome verification.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Do you see any efforts to standardize terms? I mean, do you see, like, are there pre-competitive efforts to define regenerative?
I don't. I think that, like if you look at the regenerative organic certification, there's a social pillar there. Some regenerative programs I've seen in development include that social pillar. Others do not. Some include animal welfare. Others do not. The one commonality with regenerative programs is they are firmly based in soil health. And not all of them, but a lot of them do use those 5 same soil health principles or some similar variation thereof. It might not be exact, but generally those 5 soil health principles are pretty consistent throughout most different interpretations.
Yeah, that makes sense. In my work, I end up in a lot of like NGO meetings in Europe where there's pre-competitive efforts on like the social side of sustainability, where the retailers are coming together and they're saying we want things like fair trade or rainforest alliance or sustainably grown. It seems like the US is really driving the regenerative conversation in some ways, and so it'd be interesting to see how that plays out if we get to that sort of pre-competitive effort. I haven't seen it either. I was just interested to see if you've seen anything there. Elizabeth, so with the rock, it seems so driven by brands. You've got brands as Founders and Nature's Path and Dr. Bronner's and Patagonia Provisions. They've all been champions of the regenerative organic process and label. And it feels unique, kind of, with other other programs in the sustainability space. There's a lot more fresh produce. Why do you think there's such a heavy representation in these value-added kind of brands and companies with dry goods, with shelf-stable products? And do you see any movement towards produce in the future?
Yeah. It's a fair question, and I was thinking about it before this and just kind of looking at, I think, first of all, the industry leaders who founded the ROA and who were involved early on, you know, like bringing in Nature's Path and Lotus Foods and Guayaki, they were all part of our pilot. And so naturally, that is the best way to get a product to market and have it on the shelf and have it be in front of consumers. If it's fresh produce, when you're lucky, you're going to your farmer's market and you know your farmer. I'm not sure how many people here in the webinar know their farmer, but like I know that's a really important way to support your health and support local farming economies is to go buy at the farmer's market. So that doesn't really naturally fit into getting something to the store with a consumer facing label on it. So, you know, I think that's part of the reason, like in our pilot, there just wasn't that much. We had a really famous farm, the Apricot Lane, from the Biggest Little Farm, was the one with the most kind of diverse vegetable operation. But since then, we've gotten quite a few farms that have been certified for produce now, and we're increasing in all categories. We're up to 88 different crop types are now certified rock, and we have almost 29,000 smallholders or farmers are certified under the program. So it is really growing, but a lot of it is also coming in from these global supply chains from the global south, you know, with cacao and coffee and sugar and some of those kind of crops that are more grown for export and end up here. So yeah, I mean, I think there's just a variety of factors, but really, I wanted to go back to another major intention from the founders was to protect the term regenerative from being greenwashed, because they were worried about the danger of greenwashing from corporate interests, and they really wanted to create the high bar standard to demonstrate and clarify what regenerative can and should be. And that is, you know, looking at it as a holistic type of agriculture that considers all the players in the farm system. And you know, this includes the soil microbiome, the animals, and the workers. But I love that we're all pretty united on those principles, those core principles of pertaining to the soil health. So yeah, just wanted to add that additional comment, because that was a major intention, and I think a lot of foresight from our founders of seeing what was going to happen. For anybody who was just at Expo West, regenerative was all over the place. It was a really big deal, and we need to make sure it stays meaningful and powerful as that term can be.
Yeah, it's hard too. I mean, like the Expo West is such a great platform, but there's an element of snake oil there too, right? Like, and then I think the risk of greenwashing is real, right?
Don't get me started. Yeah.
After CBD in 2019 was just on everything, and it was going to solve all our problems, and
yeah,
exciting the attention regenerative is getting. But I think having retailers have standards is really important, right? For making sure that it pushes back against that risk of greenwashing in the natural products industry.
Especially Whole Foods. Like, they've been the leader forever, and like I worked at CCF for a long time, and Whole Foods went to the extra measure of getting every store certified. Retailers didn't do that until Whole Foods led the way. So it really does make a difference.
Yeah. Elisa, I know there's been significant interest in the SCI before even launch, which is it's an interesting thing, right? Like the RLC founders were very prescient that in 2017 they're addressing issues that are relevant now. I feel like you're in a similar position. Where do you see the most demand from these brands, from the industry, and how are you seeing that influence, or how are you taking that interest and implementing it into your kind of go-to-market strategy as you roll out this year?
Yeah, that's a really, really good insight, Kevin, and a good question formed around that insight. So I want to start with and build on what all actually you and Elizabeth and Anne-Marie were all saying, which is the importance of the making sure that we've got something with great integrity here and that is not greenwashed. And I just want to, hats off to all three of you, the role that SCS Global Services plays, that ROC, led the way and went independently verified, and that Whole Foods is is requiring that. I think that's really important. That's what gets the integrity. And that's why Soil Carbon Initiative also went in that same direction for that independent verification. And the way that and because of all the different production systems, all the different kinds of crops, all the different kinds of soil, all the different weather systems, all the different realities in different countries. That's why we also went where Soil Carbon Initiative went with the outcomes base, so that you can actually measure the soil health and the soil carbon progress. And so that's how we can keep that integrity in the system. And like you said, Kevin, there is so much interest in that. We're seeing on the marketplace side, basically 3 major drivers. And that's really interesting because some of the certifications in the past have largely been driven by, for example, primarily consumers. But in this case, there's 3 major drivers. There's clearly the consumers who are very interested in understanding where their food comes, how it's grown. We've done some recent consumer research, and I know many of the people on this webinar have also done some really great consumer research. And we're finding that there's a leading group of consumers that are very interested. There's a growing group of consumers that are learning all about it. They're very sophisticated, this group. They're seeing the connections between soil health, climate, and human health. Clearly that's where the consumer market is going. You're particularly seeing this among millennials and Gen Z. So the consumer interest and the growing consumer interest and the real clarity that's where it's going to be. The old play for where the hockey puck is going, not where it is now. That's where it's going for sure. So that certainly the second driver is food companies and apparel companies who have direct agricultural products in their apparel, and that is the interest. One part is consumer, but they also have some really important other drivers. Many of them have made significant climate and sustainable development goal commitments, and so soil health is absolutely integral to that. And then secondly, many companies are seeing that this is going to be a primary source of supply chain security, both for climate resiliency, and then we have, scenario 2 playing out right now with the tragic situation in Ukraine, where between Ukraine and Russia provide so much of the world's food, particularly certain ingredients, and also fertilizers and other nutrients. So I know I was talking to a major brand last week who was sitting there going, I cannot tell you how much we are counting our blessings that we made those investments in soil health, because the farmers that we have under contract are down to near zero in fertilizer purchase, and with the cost of fertilizer skyrocketing and go up again as the secondary impact of the Ukrainian situation, they're going, wow, that was an investment that has really paid off. So there's all those supply chain, climate commitments, and consumer interest there. Lastly, we're seeing another really interesting player that's been very interested in SCI. Some of our partners are companies, are mills, and other people in the processing part of the supply chain, where they're interested, again, for all 3 drivers. Their customer, that is food companies, are increasingly interested, so they want to be prepared to meet those demands. And they work directly with farmers, in many cases under direct contract with farmers. And again, they want to provide the climate and supply chain security to their farmers. And so there's been an enormous interest amongst processors, and that's been the real. So there's all across the entire market for different drivers, but all driving into the same place, which is we really need for the future. For the present and future, we need to transition to regenerative.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think on your point of the Ukraine crisis and this disruption of supply chains with the pandemic, and it gets back to that point of resilience, right? And our food is artificially cheap in general, but when you have a lot of volatility and supply gets messed up, these regenerative practices are going to pay for themselves, right? I mean, there's going to be a point where it's more cost effective and there's a strong business case for implementing these practices.
Totally.
So,
which points to the other primary driver is the farmers. You know, separate from, so of course they want customer and consumer interest, right? They want the brands interested. They want the retailers interested. They are very proud of knowing where their food is going. You know, consumers want to know where their food is grown. Farmers want to know that their food is actually going to families. We hear that a lot from our farmers, and so they're so proud. For example, when they see their products in Whole Foods, and they can say, "Yeah, I'm in that package." I mean, that's really important to them. And again, in addition to that, the word has gotten out in farm country that the transition to regenerative is the way to drive down costs. So that's also, we're getting more and more and more farmers calling us saying, we're hearing this, yes, but how? And they're just really interested in all the ways that all of us can help the farmers with the answers to those questions.
yeah, a lot of great points there. So I'm looking at some of the questions we have from in the chat, and some kind of, I think could go to you, Anne-Marie. You know, we're seeing certification is not the only pathway to regenerative, right? These practices can be implemented everywhere. And with Expo West, there was the release of a number of new programs in this space, maybe aligning more with some of the approaches that the big CPG companies have taken, like General Mills, where they've got sort of an in-house regenerative ag program. And it's largely driven by grower surveys and self-reported data. As you're assessing these different programs from that quality side, how do you see the third-party element playing into it? Is it I know it gives assurance. Are there other avenues into a Whole Foods, right? From a labeling standpoint, from what some of these new programs that are coming to market.
Yeah, I think that was like a couple different questions, so I'll try and tackle them one by one, but feel free to circle back if I didn't answer all of them. I'll start with the in-house programs like General Mills has. And that's a great question. And we actually talked to General Mills when we were developing our general claims policy. I talked to Shauna Sadowski and I talked to Nate Powell-Palm, who is, if you get the Annie's mac and cheese that has the, talks about regenerative on the back, Nate Powell-Palm is one of those organic farmers that is using regenerative practices. And we do have a pathway for self-reported claims, but it depends on the prominence and the location of the regenerative claim itself and the type of language being used. So for some types of regenerative claims, seals or logos, we require third-party certificate. For others, we'll conduct a more detailed evaluation of the product sourcing that requires the supplier or the farmers to complete our regenerative assessment. So it's a form that they fill out based on those 5 soil health principles. We require that the responses address at least 4 of the 5 soil health principles. I want to touch on what you said earlier about that animal integration. That is why we only require 4 of the 5 soil health principles. We don't dictate which ones they are. We wanted to have a level playing field, but understanding that some produce farmers would never have strategic livestock integration, we only require 4 of those 5 principles. And then we do require that there be some system in place to monitor soil health and track improvement over time. So it's a nuanced approach. It's complicated to explain and talk about, but it was really important to us that we respect certification and the high bar of certification, but also give room for brands to talk about how they're supporting regenerative agriculture in a way that's authentic and meaningful. So essentially, if that claim is a really bold claim on the principal display panel, and it seems like the overall product is regenerative, that's where we're going to require certification. But if the claim is specific to an ingredient or talks about how the brand as a whole is supporting regenerative agriculture, that's where we would ask for the regenerative assessment to be filled out. Your other question about how we're looking at these programs that are popping up, we use those same 5 soil health principles to look at their program. We want them to have a programmatic approach to assessing the 4 of those 5 soil health principles and have some sort of outcomes verification in place. We don't dictate whether that's testing or more observational record keeping of improvements over time in biodiversity and soil health and things like that. But we do require that there be some sort of metrics in place to monitor the soil health or soil health indicators over time. And then for a certification or verification program, we would want there to be a quality management system in place where, you know, they have not necessarily ISO accreditation per se, but are meeting those ISO 9000 principles in terms of how they set up their program.
Sure. Having a good management system in place, that makes sense. Looking at some of these questions, I think just to continue on what you're talking about, you know, there was that a New Yorker article 6 months ago looking at fraud in the organic supply chain. I think especially with a lot of packaged goods having claims. How are you addressing the challenges of sort of that commodity supply chain, right? What kind of chain of custody are you requiring? What kind of management systems are you looking for with growers and brands?
Well, so like I said, if it's a bold regenerative claim, they're going to be ecological outcome verified or regenerative organic certified. Right. Like both of those have traceability components and looking at those traceability mechanisms and auditing that. If it's a regenerative assessment, it's typically not as bold of a claim, so you wouldn't necessarily have that traceability. If we're talking about a specific ingredient that's being talked about as being regenerative, we ask our supplier to identify their farmers. We're asking the farmers what they're doing, and then we ask them for their traceability mechanisms, how they're segregating those regenerative ingredients through the supply chain, how they're tracking them, and what traceability mechanisms they have in place.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to kind of put together a few questions here because we've got a ton of them and we're running out of time. So there's certainly a perception that, you know, implementing regenerative practices are more labor intensive. It can take more people because you got different tools available to you. You know, the average farmer is, I don't know, 60 something in the US. They've been doing things certain ways for probably 40 years. They might come from a lot of multi-generational family farms that have been farming the same way for a long time. What do you see as drivers for like overcoming inertia, right? Like, how do you see what's going to convince, you know, I'm in Missouri, you know, a bunch of the Missouri, Illinois, Iowa type farmers to adopt these practices. And in more, that's one question I'm going to put two together because I apologize. But if like the fresh produce side is more labor intensive, if farmers are aging, like where do you see like technology integrating here? Because it's not, this is still commercial supply chains, right? It's not like a 2-acre truck farm probably going through a certification process. So as a rambling and kind of all over this question.
I'll take a stab at that because that's a conversation like we have in or just organic as well, is how you convert farmers. And I don't think it's a technology issue. I did think definitely technology will help. I think it's a cultural issue. I think if a farmer, especially in the Midwest, if farmers' neighbors are doing conventional ag, that's what he's going to do most of the time. That's what he knows. That's the resources that are available to him or her. And if there are resources, other resources available, other places of community building available to share that knowledge and share that sense of community in a way of farming, I think that's how it spreads. And I think that's what we've seen with regenerative. It's been very accessible for farmers to start to slowly implement regenerative practices and then see their neighbors trying it. And it makes it a lot more palatable for them.
Right.
I saw that very directly in a big transition from conventional to organic dairy farming in Northern California back in the early 2000s. And the farmers were looking over the fence at their other farmers. They were seeing how often the milk truck came and picked up milk and how often the vet came or the feed truck, and they saw that their peers were doing better and they switched, they transitioned because of that. And so I think it's also like seeing that model kind of success and wanting to emulate, to try and achieve that too. Farmers are savvy and they're operating on super thin margins and they need every opportunity they can. So I've seen that very directly. I just wanted to add one other thing too, Kevin, back to what you said, is that farmers are definitely, you know, average age of 60, but I've heard so many times from farmers about how this is how my grandparents farmed. So they're going back to how they used to farm. So we're not too far off on that generation, right? And I also heard from a lot of, another really remarkable comment was about how songbirds they hadn't seen in years were back on the farm. And that's one of my favorite observations. It's anecdotal for sure, but I heard it at least 4 or 5 times.
Right, yeah. The return, exactly, Elizabeth, the return of life. And that includes children. I mean, I can also do how many farm families are saying, my children were not interested in the farm, but now they are regenerative. And where I just want to build also on what you were saying, Anne Marie. I mean, we're seeing from the farmers that are coming to SCI, we're seeing 3 major reasons. Number one, they're very interested in where their customers are going and, you know, looking for those financial incentives, because most of all, they want to get paid for what they're doing, their farming, and they really want that. So for farmers and companies in this audience, you know, just recognize that that's really an important driver. Secondly, they want that connection to community, like you were saying, Anne Marie, the other farmers that are doing this so they can learn from one another. Like the second son help on planting cover crop seeds after the harvest, that goes out after everybody else has done the harvest for the day, and he goes out in the evening with the lights to the same equipment to spread the cover seeds behind what they harvested. Those kind of techniques and learnings that they can get from one another. And then the last reason that they're interested is because of, again, the improvements to their margins and their own resiliency. We've certainly had farmers in the Central Valley, conventional farmers in the Central Valley tell us, we think it's very likely that we're going to be, because of the water issues, we're going to be down in production 35% over the next 3 years, and who knows what happens in the next 3 to 5 years after that. So everybody, in one way or another, is saying, whether it's the market, whether it's the networking, whether it's the resiliency, whether it's the margins, more and more farms are reaching out to say, how do I get involved? And again, would welcome anyone to our go-to-market pilots, soil initiative, soilcarboninitiative.org. You can sign up right there and get all the info.
Excellent. Well, I think on that note, we're at the hour. I came into this with really high expectations and you've exceeded it. So thank you, Anne Marie and Elise and Elizabeth. This is wonderful. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. We've got a lot of them, and we'll see what we can do on that front. We'll try and put links to the various programs mentioned here, and a link with the link to the webinar video once it gets processed. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks for organizing this. Thanks for inviting me. Nice seeing you all.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Have a great day.
Take care. Bye.
For what you do on behalf of our food system. Thank you.
Thank you.